The most cynical thing you can say about the Transformer shows is that they are just commercials. And the thing is, that's kind of true. They are not commercials in the traditional sense of simply informing you of a product existing, but more so that they create characters that the viewers learn to care about, and those characters just happen to be available for purchase. They achieve this by making the characters interact in unique and interesting ways. It's not about fighting, it's about characters, their personalities, and how they bounce off each other in these interesting situations. The characters don't have to be that deep to get you to start to care. Red Alert is paranoid. The Dinobots are cavemen.
Grimlock know what he does!
Soundwave is loyal. Starscream is treacherous. Not every series has to be Beast Wars with incredible character interaction. They just need to give us something to work with. They need to advertise why you or your kids should care that there is a toy of these characters that you can buy. And to that end, War for Cybertron Siege is a horrendous commercial. Let's start with the obvious problem. Siege is over. We are thigh-deep into Earthrise. The toys aren't even on shelves anymore. This series should have premiered before or at the start of Siege, but it's a year and a half late. That means we are also on track for the Earthrise season to miss the entire line after Earthrise, and the season after that to come out a year and a half after all War for Cybertron toys are off shelves. What kind of commercial advertises a product you can't buy anymore? Because of that, Hasbro had to do a large number of redecoed re-releases of all the Siege line just before the launch of the show. And either Hasbro messed up and the toys were early, or the show got delayed because they were still out and sold long before the show ever came. Every end of this was a marketing disaster. They had to re-release the toys to help the show help the toys, but the show was still too late for that to work. The show is made to help sell the toys. How did they screw that up? Secondly, and just as importantly, this is a bad commercial because its goal is to make you fall in love with the characters. Who is going to fall in love with the characters from this show? Look, I loved this line. Siege Optimus is one of my favorite official Transformers figures ever, and so many of these figures are truly spectacular. But now when I look at them, they're a little tainted. Who is going to love Moron Optimus Prime, who leads his troops into traps because he doesn't believe he can be betrayed by someone who has already betrayed him? Moron Ultra Magnus, who turns himself into the faction executing all their prisoners because he thinks he can convince them to... what? Surrender? They've already offered a peace treaty, and Magnus refuses to order his own troops to surrender. So, what is he going to do? Moron Jetfire, who doesn't realize his faction has turned evil despite the fact that they murder all their prisoners by impaling them on spikes. Moron Ratchet, who thinks the faction not executing their prisoners is just as bad as the faction who is. Moron Wheeljack, who turns on a big come get me sign while on a stealth mission just to see if it would work, and then refuses to turn it off because there is no reason. He just doesn't because he's a moron. Ielita 1, who seems competent. That's all I could glean of her character. Why couldn't this show have been about her? She's the one person who doesn't make any horrible blunders for no reason at any point. Bumblebee, who literally got his character forcibly reprogrammed into an Autobot halfway through the show. We sure got to know him well, didn't we? Brittle Skywarp, who dies from a single blaster wound to the shoulder. Omega Supreme, Ironhide, Chromia, Moonracer, Barricade, and Soundwave, who all show up for a collective 1 minute. And... oh, no. The reason Mirage and Impactor piss and moan at each other in the show is because of the Versus 2-pack. How much do you want to bet it didn't matter who was voted for in the 2-pack? The plot about the finger quotes conflict between the two characters was already written and would have been the exact same no matter who it was. Moron Impactor, who tells everyone he swore a promise to himself to protect Cybertronians. Wow, thanks dude. That wouldn't mean anything if you weren't from the faction going around ramming spears up the asses of everyone they capture. What is this cringy, idiotic line doing pretending it means anything. The only character to get any kind of interesting development is Megatron, and I don't know. Personally, I feel like it makes him less marketable. I feel like evil and loves it Megatron is just more marketable than kind of evil and becoming more so Megatron. Don't get me wrong, good guy Megatron is great. My favorite version of the character, in fact. Conflicted Megatron is interesting, but possibly because we know what he's going to evolve into, this version of him is just one that doesn't have any bite yet. It's clear he's not the most enjoyable version of himself yet. And then there's the major missed opportunity with Jetfire and Starscream. For whatever reason, they're kind of rivals here. Jetfire is Starscream's boss, and Starscream is constantly trying to look good in front of Megatron to usurp Jetfire. It's interesting to see Starscream pull his traditional shtick with everyone on the way up to Megatron, but it loses out on the fangirl market. The one humanizing thing about Starscream has always been his friendship with Jetfire, but that is not in this show at all. And if you want to get the fangirls on board, you need to give them a bromance. So they threw that opportunity right out the window. Instead, they made Starscream into a weird bigot who doesn't want the warrior Decepticon lineage tainted with Autobots. Weren't the Decepticons implied to have been something like indentured servants before the war in this? I don't think you're the proud warrior race you think you are, Screamy Boy. So instead of marketable and endearing characters, we have a bunch of cardboard cutouts who act like idiots, every one of whom gets very little screen time in order to fit like 4 different plots. And when we do see them, they have very little in the way of character interaction. The most well-defined character relationships are Starscream wants to get promoted over Jetfire. Megatron doesn't want to execute Ultra Magnets. Starscream repeatedly tells Megatron how cool he is. Elita 1 and Prime were a couple at some point. And Mirage and Impactor hate each other, but then suddenly don't. I think that's all of them. Wheeljack tells Bumblebee to pick a side. They don't really share any screen time after that. That's it, I think. Hilariously, one of the most well-characterized characters is Sound Blaster, the flat repaint of Soundwave. Now, that's because we're actually told his backstory and characterization purely through exposition, and he doesn't really get to show off any of it, but it immediately made him more interesting than any other character in the show. It did almost make me want the toy. But all that is better than what the vast majority of the figures in the Siege line got. A huge swath of the toy line got no representation in the show. You may argue that Beast Wars was the same way, but this is nothing like Beast Wars. It is both that CGI is no longer the most expensive, bleeding-edge form of animation like it was during the creation of Beast Wars, but also the models used here are clearly not being made from scratch. They clearly just used the CAD files from the actual toys to make up the entire cast. So while of course they were touched up for the show, there was nothing stopping them from using the figures that weren't included at the very least as background characters, even if only to better justify the existence of this show. It is insane how many of the toys don't have any presence. None of the Micromasters nor the Battlemasters make any appearance. Neither Brunt nor Six Gun show up. None of the Power Dashers, Bluestreak nor Smokescreen, Hotshot, Nightbird, Greenlight and Lancer, Countdown, and Springer are all not appearing in this film, and there is no mention of Optimus Prime's Galaxy upgrade. That's over 29 characters who don't show up in this sorry excuse for a commercial. Did they have time to have all these characters? Hell no! They didn't have time for the characters they did use, which just begs the question why there were so few episodes in the first place. And not all these characters needed to be given a role, but we don't see them at all. Cliffjumper is given a mention over any of these, and Moonracer gets an actual role as a flat recolor of Chromia, instead of these other characters who this show is supposed to advertise. Maybe they just didn't want one of the new toys to show up and die for no good reason. This show just isn't memorable. I suppose that's another sin this series commits in the marketing department. Years later, I can remember everything about Transformers series I hate. It's been 2 weeks and I've already forgotten half of this show. I keep having to look at my Siege shelf to remind myself who was in it. There isn't even much good action in this series. The characters don't get to endear themselves by doing cool stuff in a fight. Jetfire gets a cool scene where he shows off a bit of fancy flying and then does one of those in and out of transformation attacks that can really spice up a Transformers battle, and Mirage gets to show off Hound's hologram powers that he's apparently stolen for himself. But mostly this show is people firing into the distance from behind cover and maybe doing some punching or throws. We don't have any scenes where someone wades into battle to go ham on the enemies. Everyone looks like they just don't want to get shot. There's a happy balance between cool action and dangerous action, and this show doesn't even get close to it. It's hilarious. This show doesn't focus on characters, and it doesn't focus on action because it's busy focusing on plot. The thing that least endears the viewer to the characters. Look at this world-endangering event! Who cares? The characters are all at best blank slates, and at worst, actively stupid. I don't care about the characters, therefore I don't care what they do or what danger they are in. There seems to be this currently pervading idea throughout media that people will care about what happens as long as the stakes are the highest they can be. As a consequence, every plot now is not the most important thing to happen to the main characters, but the most important thing to happen to everyone ever. No one can relate to that. Something bad happening to 10 people is a tragedy. Something bad happening to 1 million is a statistic. Ultimately, we have a show with unrelatable, two-dimensional, inhuman characters with too much plot for the story's own good and little in the way of enjoyable action. It manages to be shallow by focusing on story at the expense of everything else. In order to do its job right, this show needed to be two things: on time and endearing, and it's neither. Late by 1.5 years and featuring people you can't care about. What a waste of money. What a misguided commercial. And that's not half of what I have to say, but it's enough of what I have to say. Anyways, I know, you know, what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So if you like what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, the next time you're hanging out with a friend who might enjoy these videos, please share it with them. I hope you enjoyed listening to me waste your time.